Hi everybody, it's Lori here today with a very challenging, at least for me, it was a very challenging week of books that had colors in the title. Let's talk about it. This week was one of the more challenging weeks that I had with a book topic or theme that I picked. I did this to myself. Nobody picked this for me. Nobody picked the books, but the books that I ended up picking for some reason were a bit challenging for me. I changed my mind multiple times. These were not all the books that I went through in terms of trying to pick the TBR list. This was a tough one and I don't know why. I'm guessing that if I did this 6 months later that perhaps it wouldn't be as difficult. I don't know. I think it just had to do with what I was feeling like wanting to mood read at the time, and so it became a little bit of a challenge. Let's talk about the books that I read or attempted to read this week. There were others that didn't make the cut. That happens all the time, but let's talk about the ones that I at least attempted to read this week. The first one was Jade City by Fonda. If you saw, I think it was last week's video, I talked about this, how long this one took me to get through. It is a chunky, hefty book. So yes, it definitely took me some time to get through. Because of that chunky book, I chose this one, The Mystery at Lilac Inn. It's a Nancy Drew mystery. You know, I'm trying to revisit some of these, some childhood favorites of mine. So I thought it would be good time to add that in. We had Red Widow by Alma Katsu. I decided to try this because I did talk about this author, I believe it was last week, when I was reviewing a Dave Barry book, Swamp Story, and this is a friend of his, Tim Dorsey, Clownfish Blues. So I thought, what the heck, I'm already talking about this author. I looked to see if his backlist, if there was anything that had any colors in it, and it did. And then Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. So let's start with Yellowface. This one was really tough. Now you've seen everybody and their mother, auntie, cousin, sister, everybody is reading this book and has some very strong opinions. We have June Haywood here and her friend Athena. They are both writers. Now Athena is much more successful than June has been. June finds herself incredibly jealous of Athena. And the way that it's talked about in the book, I honestly felt kind of bad for Athena in terms of it really felt like she thought of June as more of a friend than June felt about her. It seems like she tried to stay in touch. I mean, I guess they both did in their own kind of weird competitive rivalry kind of way, maybe to kind of circle each other to see what the other was doing, if the other was more successful, and whoever was the most successful felt superior. I don't know if that was the case or not, but in any event, they were rivals, kind of friends, but spent time together. They really did. They spent some moments together. They would go out to dinner, have drinks, that type of thing. Well, unfortunately, during one of those events or after party events, Athena dies having a pancake eating contest with June. And what does June do? I mean, does she think, oh my gosh, my friend's dead. I don't know what I'm going to do. This is the person that I always turn to when I had something exciting to share about the publishing industry or my book or anything else. No, she decides to selfishly steal Athena's manuscript that nobody else has seen. Athena typed it all out on an old school typewriter. I'll put a picture here. I have one, actually. My sons are of the millennial Gen Z age bracket, and my son had some friends over and he was like, what is that thing? So it's like, okay. So it's a typewriter. All of the manuscripts that she types out. She liked the feel, the tactile sensation of typing it out that way. And so nobody had seen this manuscript. Find it a little hard to believe, honestly, that nobody knew anything about the book that she was working on. But in any case, perhaps the publishing industry kind of turned a blind eye because they wanted the book. June decides that she's going to all of a sudden just have this fully fleshed out manuscript. So June does work on it. She does. She changes things around. There were some gaps that Athena had left. to fill in later. And so June does. She goes through the entire thing. She fills in gaps, changes it up, tries to add her own voice to it, but ultimately it's Athena's manuscript and she stole it. She then passes it off on her as her own, and because this book is about Chinese laborers in World War I, the publisher decides, to make it a little bit more palatable to change June's name to be a little bit more ambiguous, culturally ambiguous. In other words, they're lying too. Everybody's lying. So she uses her middle name, it's Juniper Song, that is, she is normally June Haywood, changes it to Juniper Song. She works with a photographer to do a very kind of ambiguous looking photo of the author. And so people start to really think that she is Asian, and things start to crumble around her. This book, the problem with this book for me, I didn't love it. I didn't give it a 5-star. I feel like you love it or you're not really sure how to feel about it. Every character in here was terrible. I don't think there was one good character that I was like, they're good. I think you're supposed to hate everybody in here. And so therefore this whole thing made me feel icky, honestly, for a very long time. I read this a couple of weeks ago and haven't really been able to form coherent sentences about how I felt about this. Now, as everybody has said, it is a very fast-paced read. I wanted to know what was going to happen because you're thinking the whole time, or at least I was thinking, this is not going to end well. This doesn't bode well. It's not going to end well. Something terrible is going to happen, and you want to find out what's going to happen. And that's definitely how I felt throughout. But June was such a despicable character that I wanted just terrible things to rain down on her. Didn't like the way the publishing house handled things. There's that whole concept of authors in reviewers' spaces, which obviously hits close to home for me because I obviously review books. I review it here, Goodreads, on NetGalley, that type of thing. And so that whole scenario was really jarring for me. And it was supposed to be. I get it. It was supposed to be. Although people are saying it's deeply, darkly funny, like a satire, but I was not laughing here. It just made me feel awful and my skin crawl, and the way that all of this happened and everybody just turned a blind eye to it, it made me feel gross, and I think it's supposed to. Rebecca Kuang is awfully young and she's very successful. I'm not sure this would be the same book 20 years from now. And I guess you could say that about any author because we grow and develop hopefully over time. And the book that we would write now would be different than the book we would write 20 years from now or 30 years from now. I'm wondering if she's going to look back on this book in her career. And of course, she's probably not going to admit it, but just wonder if this was the right book for her at this time. Only she would be able to answer that. It's none of my business, but it felt deeply personal to her. It really did. And so that was another thing that I felt as I was reading this book. All that to say, I'm not sure if I want to rate this. I think it did what it was supposed to do. It brought up the emotions that it was supposed to bring up. Very shiny cover. It's from the library. I think a lot of people will really like this. I think it's going to make a lot of people very uncomfortable, like it did myself, and I think it's supposed to. So for that, it hit all of the marks. So that was the first book that I read for this week. The next book that I tackled, which I did mention already, was Jade City, and it took me quite some time to get through this. This is by Fonda Lee, and it's a part of a trilogy, I believe. I have the other two books. I did buy those books as well while I was reading it and listening to it on audio. I decided to go that route because it was hard for me with all of the names and the places to keep it all straight in my mind, and I wanted to pronounce the names properly, and I was stumbling over them. So I am somebody that reads it aloud in my head as I'm reading on the pages. And I get stuck when some of the words are unfamiliar to me or names are unfamiliar. I'm not sure how to pronounce them properly and my brain just gets stuck. So I think that's what was happening in the beginning of this book for me. And so when I got the audiobook, it was much better. That saved me for sure. But I struggled through this book for 2 weeks. I really did. And I found myself not super eager to always pick it up. Some books, I cannot wait to, after work, to get my hands on the book again and finish it up. Because usually I'll start a book at night after work and then finish it up the following day after work. And a lot of times after work, I'm like so excited to pick it up again and figure out what's going on. Do a lot of reading on the weekends as well. And so I wasn't really finding myself super drawn to this book. Unfortunately, it was taking me forever. So once I got the audiobook, it did go faster. And I will say, after I got to a certain point, I mean, probably 75% of the way through the book, I was really eager to find out what was going to happen. There was so much setup and world building for me. So in this book, we have two warring clans, basically, that are trying to control the Jade on their island. For them, it's their source of power, so it's like their magic system is Jade, but anybody that doesn't have that basically genetics to be able to handle Jade as a magic system sees it more as a drug. They get what's called the itches and they die eventually from using it. We have another group of people, I think it's the Stone Eyes, that are able to handle Jade with nothing happening at all. So it doesn't become a power source to them that they can tap into, nor does it seem like a drug that causes them to basically overdose, want more and more and more until eventually they die. So they're the three groups of people ultimately. And both of these clans are warring against one another to control Jade. It's a natural resource, but there is only so much that the ground contains, and so they mine it. They have an agreement of what they'll do with the Jade, but they're still warring against each other. They both control certain areas of the island. They get payments for protection, just like you would see in gangster mob movies and books in the past. And so if you like, and I've heard this too before I went into it, if you like gangster mob types of books, it's definitely very heavy on that in this one. I also have heard that it's very much a political type of scenario, and I would agree with that as well. There's a lot of politics in here. There's not as much action or violence as I thought that there would be, and I think that was part of the problem. I kept expecting there to be more violence, more action, more things being lobbed at one clan and then the other attacks them. It's definitely in here, but it's not as much as I thought. Not as much scheming, not as many backdoor dealings. And so there was a lot more political aspects, talking about who's in charge of what, how long they've been around, who has alliances here and there. This really long meeting that they had to try to get the clans together. And so it wasn't as fast paced as I was expecting it to be. Like I said, at the end, 75% of the way through, it definitely picked up. So much so that I really want to know what happens and did by the other two, like I've already said. But it just kind of dragged for me. This first book dragged. And I know people love this series. And so I think what's going to end up happening is I'm going to go back and probably change my rating once I finish the whole series, because I'll see how much it really needed to be set up for all of it to come together. But at this moment, I'm giving it a 3.75. I really did enjoy it, but I had to downgrade it because of how long it took me to read it. And truly, kind of think I put myself into kind of a bad reading slump after those two books. Yellowface was depressing. I just thought to myself how much people are just out for number one and they don't care about anybody else. I know that's not, that's a broad statement. It's not true in all cases. Just like everything, there are exceptions. But that book just highlighted so much about the bad in people that I was like, oh, I don't know. So there was nothing that was really scratching the itch that I wanted to read next. So I definitely thought, all right, I'll just read the Nancy Drew novel, which I did. I'm not rating middle grade or children's books at this point because I'm not the age range. I know that I'm not. I did really enjoy this. This was a good one. I would say if I was going to rate it, it was a little bit better than the other previous couple that I have on my shelf. So I would give it a little bit higher of a rating, because there was a lot of action in this one. We had Nancy and a friend of hers that ended up going to this inn to prepare for her friend's wedding. They decide to go there kind of as a little getaway, and bad things start happening. And so Nancy, of course, investigates, gets involved. There's kind of a lot of danger in here. A lot of things are going on, and I'm surprised. It was funny because her dad, definitely Carson Drew, shows up a couple of times, and I was thinking, I can't believe he was not more concerned about her safety. It's just like, okay, whatever. But I guess he knows that she can take care of herself and always does. But anyway, I thought this was a little bit better than some of the other ones that I have recently read. So I liked it. I thought it was pretty fast-paced. A lot of things going on. I'm going to continue to read these here and there, slot them into TBRs, just especially when I have a very large, chunky, hefty book. I just like to revisit these. It's nice, nostalgic, bringing back my childhood a little bit. So I enjoyed this. I will probably take these to one of the little libraries around my house that kind of seems to focus more on, according to, they have a little website, seems like they have a lot more kids books. And I thought that might be kind of interesting to drop them off there. We'll see what I end up finding when I'm there. All right, so the last two books, like I said, this was a struggle. And I'm trying to remember, there was at least one other book. It's up here. This was originally on my list and I just didn't feel like it this week. I don't know why, but I own it. I will be adding it to a TBR probably very soon. But yeah, I just wasn't feeling this book. It does have a color in the title and I don't know why. I should have probably just read it. Didn't want it to be tainted by this cloud that was hanging over this week, and I'm like, I'll save it for a different week. Not sure. So I decided to try this one, Tim Dorsey, Clownfish Blues, and I will tell you, I made it through about 15 pages and was like, nope, can't do it. Now, the reason for that is I was totally lost and really felt like it had more to do with the fact that this was late in a long-running series, and I knew that the characters that were introduced were characters that had been prominent in this series, just based on the blurb, and then I did some research just to make sure. And I think that I was completely clueless because of that, and I was my feelings of the book were tainted because of it. So I decided that I'm not going to read this now. I'm not sure. If any of you have read this series from this author, let me know. Do I need to start at book 1? Or sometimes you can start at like book 5 or whatever and it'll make sense. If you've read the series, what do you think? This was definitely like, is it 15 or 12 or something? It's far down in the series. There was a lot of backstory I was missing that made no sense to me. So let me know if you've read the series. Do I have to start at book 1 or is there another book that I can kind of jump into and see if the series is for me? But I did DNF this. I'm not going to count it as a DNF in, like Goodreads or anything like that because it was my fault. Definitely wasn't the author. I decided, okay. This other one, however, Red Widow. I am gonna love spy fiction. Love it. This is a book about a CIA agent who has been brought home kind of in shame after an event you really don't learn about at first what happened. She's worried that she's going to lose her career, long-running career, lose all her benefits, all that type of thing. And she's brought home from a foreign post, told to take personal leave. I forget what they call it, but basically a leave of absence and use up some vacation time, cool her heels for a while they do an investigation. And I think she gets about 2 days in and then is called back, only to find out that the major asset that she brought in when she was working for the Russian division has been killed. And so she is asked to investigate, figure out what had happened, and go from there. She's known as the human lie detector, which I found interesting as I was reading through this. And so there are a lot of players in here, a lot of pieces, a lot of moving parts, a lot of agents that are current people from her past as she tries to look into this while still being stateside, which I thought was interesting as well. I will tell you, I got a little bit over 50% of the book and decided to wave the white flag. This was so incredibly boring and not at all what I thought. I think it would have been a whole lot better had she been sent overseas. And I get it, not everybody's a field agent. You have a lot of analysts that work in offices, do a lot of boring or some people think it's boring, behind the scenes type of investigations that don't have anything to do with being in the field. There were just too many players involved to keep it all straight. I felt like I needed a diagram and I don't want to have to do that. I mean, that is not fun for me to try to make this whole diagram of how everybody overlaps with one another. There wasn't any field work or any dangers. Definitely not Jason Bourne. that type of thing. And it just wasn't action-packed enough for me. Now, the author, I believe, has another book that just came out this year. I'm not saying that I won't try that. I might give it, 75 to 100 pages at some point in the future, because I do know that a lot of times a first book, especially setting up characters and relationships and all of that, can, get a little wordy and lengthy at times for a newer author. I may try another one because, like I said, I tend to really have loved spy fiction in the past, and it might have been tainted too by the week that I was having with all of the books. I DNF'd this one too, and I hate it. So I am counting that one as a DNF on Goodreads. And I just decided, you know what? That's it. I have tried hard enough to make this week work. And I figured there aren't any other books. I decided, you know what? I'm going to save this one for a different week. Just was a really challenging week. So I will tell you, I am currently working on reading the books for Summerween. I will be participating in doing a video for that. I'm having a great reading week so far. I have read 2. I'm in the midst of the 3rd book. I am so excited. The first 2 were smash hits, so that was great. And I did finish the books for another video that will come out after Summerween. I'm a little bit ahead of the game there. And those books were much better. So I think I have gone past this kind of a reading slump, summertime sadness, whatever you want to call it, like the blues, summer blues, whatever. I think I've gone past it. Hopefully, fingers crossed, that we have gone past that. But in any event, I will be back. I have another video in the works for this coming weekend that is going to do the mid-year freakout. I will be participating in Summerween next week, and then we will do a June wrap-up to talk about all of the books that I read for the month of June. I am also participating in a readathon in the month of August, so lots of great fun things upcoming. Can't wait to share that with all of you. If this is the kind of content that you like and enjoy, make sure you give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye, everybody.